Shouldn't have said that before I'm actually set up. Go. Right, how are we getting on? Is that working? Just setting up the Facebook. This is the bit I'm trying to get better at. Great stuff. Right, that's working. Good. If you can hear me, can someone just put something in the chat just to say that they can hear me? Because that would be really helpful. Great stuff. Good. Got a thumbs up. Brilliant. Okay, 7 o'clock. We will start pretty much bang on. So this tonight I'm going to talk about small-sided games. I'm a big fan of small-sided games. I also know there's a lot of research about small-sided games. There's a lot of stuff out there already. So I'm going to kind of give my viewpoint on why I like to use them, what I like to do with them, why I think they're so important at all age groups as well. Then I'm going to give you a load of examples of small-sided games that I use. Now, I had a big debate in coaching recently, and I was out doing some in-situ visits for a UEFA B license, and I had a coach working with players who's very much pass, and he works with young teenagers, which I'm fine with. Although my personal point of view is I still like a bit of technical stuff with more dribbling and stuff like that in there as well. And actually, the argument there is, well, there's no right or wrong. Neither of us are right or wrong. So even though I'm mentoring a coach, it's that understanding of actually if that's their philosophy, then that should be encouraged because we don't want to create loads of robots. So my point with this is, well, I'm going to give you some information about how I like to use small-sided games. And there's stuff that I'm going to say about decision making and how I don't like to narrow decision making, although at some points I will, but go with what you think's right and what suits your style as a coach, because we need coaches that try to do different things. Then always just analyze, is it working or is it not working? That's really important. Okay, so small-sided games. I'll go quickly through the agenda. We'll do an introduction. Some of you have seen this before, so I'll apologize in advance. What is a small-sided game? We'll talk about what the benefits are. We're then going to go through a load of examples of small-sided games, which is nice and simple. But then after that, I'm going to talk about how you can add constraints and rules to a variety of small-sided games, as well as scenarios that you might be able to use. And then we'll talk a little bit about challenging individuals and the group. So something I get asked all the time is, well, if I've got one player that's currently up here and one player that's currently down there, how do I challenge both of those players? And it's something that we work a lot with coaches on. So little introduction. Apologies, like I said, if you've had this before. Bit of background on myself. I've coached since 2006 at grassroots level, as well as working at academy and semi-professional level. I currently have my UEFA A license, and I tutor the introduction to coaching football, the UEFA C and the UEFA B. I know people are slowly getting onto those qualifications now, so hopefully I'll start seeing more and more people face to face. I set up my own company, TSC, in 2011 to help local football players. So we've been going for 12 years now, and we do football coaching as well as coaching in schools, the community, etc. And we've kind of grown through franchising and through probably good recruitment and good reputation. So that came to setting up the TSC Coaches Club, which you now see on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and to try and help more grassroots coaches, and also to try and create a bit of a community where everyone's helping each other. And what's important is, like I said, is I'm giving my opinions out a lot on that. I'm more than happy for people to come back and challenge those opinions and say what they think as well. And then more recently, we've just started to do a newsletter as well with the Coaches Club. So we're sending out newsletters probably every 3 or 4 weeks at the moment, but hopefully we'll start to progress that to more frequent. And that is then going to progress to what we're trying to do is, like I said, I get asked about sessions all the time. We will be doing a weekly newsletter, which will have sessions for each set of age groups each week. that is going to be more of a subscription-based model to help coaches that want to put the extra bit in. But we'll still be doing this free stuff year round as well. So what is a small-sided game? And this is where you can have some debate with it. So for me, my opinion, and the most important thing is they look like the game. They look like a game of football, but just on a smaller scale. So for me, this is really important because the closer you can keep it to the game, then the players are going to get a lot more out of it. But your skill as a coach is in adjusting the game, making little tweaks on area, size and shape, rules for individuals, and I'll say rules, constraints, people use these words, but making it look as much like the game as possible. So whenever you are coaching, step back and say, does this look like the game? Even if you're doing a little 2v2 drill or anything like that, does it look like the game? If it doesn't, think about how to change it. So that's where we don't do, personally, any dribbling through cones. I don't do any dribbling through cones. I don't mind players doing that away from training, because I think it's got a little bit of technical stuff in it away from training. But during training, I always try to make sure there's something that involves some decision making, because it looks more like the game. So instead of having players dribbling through cones, I might have players dribbling that direction and some going that direction. So there's interference. So they figure out where to slow down and speed up. So there's normally two teams in a small-sided game, and it's an invasion game. Okay, so they're attacking and defending an area. And an important note is teams don't always have to be equal as well. That will come on the challenging part, where we challenge individuals and groups. And now they can also have adjusted rules. So this is where you start to go, well, that doesn't look like the game if you restrict the rules, which is true. But if you're trying to get a specific outcome, you might need to adjust and change the rules. And then as long as you can justify it as a coach, I'm doing this for this reason, that's absolutely fine. And then also it's trying things. You can say, I'm trying something and it might work, it might not work. Have a go at it. And that's also where it can be related to a specific tactical outcome. So actually you can have more attacking based small-sided games, defensive based ones that are based around counter-attacking, transition, and hopefully most small-sided games will involve all of these things, but you can manipulate the rules to make sure that they focus more on one of those things if you want them to. Okay, so next one, the benefits of small-sided games. So for me, and I've said this, you'll see it in my blogs, in my videos, the best decision makers become the best players. So I put a story in my blog about when I went and played in a coaching course, my Youth Mod 2, and there was I won't say his name because he's quite a well-known coach now. He was ex-pro and he was enjoying that part of his life now where he wasn't his fittest. I was this like 20-year-old just sprinting around everywhere, tearing around everywhere. I couldn't get near him because it was just his decision making on when to drop off, when to move, when to stand still, when to move the ball quickly. I just couldn't get near him, and I was just running around blowing. So the decision making is such a vital part, and you've probably all got players now. If you coach under 7s, 8s, 9s, they will make so many decisions that you see as wrong. Is unbelievable. As they get to adults, some players will still make loads of wrong decisions, but we're trying to refine that process as players get older. So they should improve their decision making. And when you talk about players reaching a kind of doing most of their learning before a certain age, and then when they get to 17 to 21, it's more of a refining stage. That is mainly about them refining their decision making based around tactics. So by using small-sided games, and because it looks like the game and it's realistic, players will constantly make decisions. If you get players making hundreds or thousands of decisions a training session, they're going to learn and develop, especially if they're visually seeing the snapshots. So that's why it's important to make them look game related as well. They'll then be more effective, but your skill as a coach is helping them with that decision making. Now, that shouldn't be telling them what decisions to make, not saying pass, shoot, dribble, let them make decisions knowing they'll get it wrong. I also don't agree with, personally, just leave them, they'll figure it out. There's got to be a point that we have to coach. Okay, so first I would go leave them to it, see if they figure it out. If they don't, maybe use some challenges, then maybe use some questions, and it might eventually get to the point where I do just tell them, and that's okay. But it's more than a few minutes to get to that point. You'll be looking for a fair bulk of a session to give them the opportunity to learn themselves. So letting them make decisions, and then number 2, as well as the more decisions, they're getting more touches of the ball. So I use 2v2 with under 7s and 8s and even under 9s a lot. Because when you're playing 2v2, you are either on the ball or you're supporting the ball. So you are constantly involved in a decision at all times. I still use 2v2 with adults, teenagers as well, but that's more of their kind of warm up 10-15 minutes with those age groups or fitness work. But with young players especially, loads of 2v2 because you're either on the ball or supporting it. So you're always coachable and you're always thinking and learning. As that progresses up to 3v3 and 4v4, there's a little bit more of a chance to not be involved, but most of the time you are involved. So more touches and more decisions. I use 4v4 a lot with adults as well as teenagers, because I still think you can teach all the tactical things you need to teach within a 4v4, whether that's penetration, width, and the defensive side of things, pressing, cover. And I always say, if you look above a pitch, what you'll see is 1v1s, 2v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, 4v4s in little isolated areas. So that's why it's so important for me. And they'll get more touches to improve their technical stuff, more decisions, so they'll refine that decision-making process. More engaging is the third part, especially for kids, but even for adults. They enjoy it more because they're involved more. No one wants to be the right back that hasn't touched the ball for 2 or 3 minutes. People play football because they want to get involved with playing football. So it's definitely more engaging for me in my experience. They also get the opportunity to attack. They get the opportunity to defend, to counter attack. So they get exposed to all the different parts of the game. Whereas if you're doing 7v7, 8v8, someone might be stuck at the back defending and they're not experiencing the other parts of the game. So that is massively then more engaging. And this is why a lot of time I start sessions for younger players with a game and then break it down and then open it back up again. So I've already gone on to part 4 there. There's more opportunities to attack, defend, and transition. Now, this one is not always brought up. One thing that is normally brought up is my poor spelling, and I've just seen numbers is spelled wrong in there. It's easier to monitor and analyze players. So actually in small groups, you notice a lot more detail about players. So if you ever want to stand there and watch players and go, right, what's that player really doing well? What's that player might need some help with or some work on? Do it in a smaller game, because it's a lot easier to notice the detail. And a trick I used with a coach the other night was, I was like, I'm just going to film one player for 2 minutes. So just watch one player in loads and loads of detail for 2 minutes. What's that player doing well on the ball and off the ball? What could they improve on the ball and off the ball? From that 2 minute video, the coach came away with kind of 5 or 6 things that player was doing really, really well, it needs to be praised and highlighted for. And there's also a couple of things, actually, they could be better if they do that, but wouldn't have noticed it if it wasn't broken down into a smaller area and what they were looking at. So, and then opportunities to learn about tactics. So an argument is, can you learn about tactics in a 4v4 or in a 3v3? Well, tactics are basically your principles of play. If you can get principles of play right, such as penetration, create your width and depth, and then movement to create space, if you can get these things right, it doesn't matter if you're playing 3v3, 4v4, 5v5, you'll be more effective in the 11-a-side game. So then you go back to, well, you get more opportunities to do these things in small-sided games, so it will prepare you better for the 11-a-side game. I always use the idea about how to, when you're trying to play a penetrating pass. So for me, the first part of my philosophy is, can you try and play forward? Now, it doesn't mean smash it, it's just with no hope. It's look up, if you've got a forward pass on, play it forward straight away. So if you're doing a 4v4 game, where instead of having goals at each end, you've got a target player at each end, it might be you play the ball into someone, set it back, and then there's an opportunity to play that pass through to that target player straight away. Or it might be the opportunity to play through to a goal if you've got it. So you can still teach those tactics within small-sided games. You've just got to start narrowing down what that tactic is and maybe be a bit more creative as a coach. So you can teach everything tactical you need within it. What you might argue against that is if you're doing it with older players and you need a really big area. So yes, you might not actually be getting a technical part of playing a 40-yard pass out wide, but actually, can you get the basic principles of, we play 2 or 3 passes on this side of the pitch to encourage the other team to come over. When the other team come over to defend, we can turn out and switch to play. So if you teach that principle in a small group, you then just go, right, now you're in the big game, the principle remains the same, play a few passes on this side and then play the ball out, turn out, and then we can play to the other side of the pitch. Doesn't change, it's just the area size gets a bit bigger. Okay, I talk a lot and I talk quite quick, as a lot of you know. If you want to, you can chuck questions in the chat or comments in chat at any point. I will not always answer them straight away, but I will come back to it. I will get to them and answer them in little times when I can. Right, so examples. I'm actually on time for my schedule for once as well. So 6 examples, a couple of them you might have seen before, but then what I'll do is go and give more ways to change sessions afterwards as well. And then hopefully more detail after that you can use. Again, coaching for me is have a go at something. If you see 2 or 3 things here that you like and you think the rest are rubbish, great. Take those 2 or 3 things and just have a go at them. If you do have a go at them, drop me a message and tell me that you've tried it. If it's worked or not worked, tell me that as well, because I'm always happy to give a bit of advice back if it's wanted. Okay, so small-sided games. Most people will have seen this setup, but I've done a few adaptations on how you can teach within this setup. So all it is a normal pitch, but split into thirds. So the pitch is split into thirds, so it doesn't matter if you're playing 4v4, 7v7, 11v11, adjust the pitch based on the amount of players you've got and the age of those players. So obviously I probably wouldn't do 11v11 because that's not a small-sided game. It's a full-size game. Adults, I would break down into 2 smaller ones. So there's loads of ways you can do this, but the one thing I always stay away from is locking players into zones. I never say to players, you can't come out of that zone. I might say to players, try and operate in that zone as much as you can, especially the striker, but I'll never say you can't come out of it, because that can negatively affect decision making. So if it is the right thing for the striker to drop another 2 yards to receive the ball so someone can run in behind, they won't be able to do that if they're locked in a zone. Also, if you do this with players, it doesn't matter how old they are, none of them want to be locked in the defending zone. They all want to be locked in the midfield or the finishing zone. So that will affect their engagement and their motivation. So I never lock them in zones. What I tend to use, if I'm using it in the most basic premise, I will say to teams, and this will help them to learn to spread out, to create width and depth, which is really important. I will say, when you score a goal, can you try and have a player in each third of the pitch? So that means you should have a player sat back to protecting the counter attack. You'll have midfielders supporting the play in case it breaks down and you lose the ball, and you'll have players in the final area trying to finish. If you then want to be stricter, you can say the goal doesn't count unless you've got a player in each third. What this will teach is a bit of awareness as well. So it's about players that look around and go, it's about the centre back that looks around and goes, he's about to bomb forward or she's about to bomb forward, and they go, hang on, if I go and we lose the ball, that player's going to be in to score. So I'm just going to stay here and actually think about the transition. And vice versa, we're under the cosh a little bit. If I go and get involved and we win the ball, we're not going to be able to counter attack because we haven't got anyone to play to. So I'm going to stay here. So if we win it, I'm in space that they can play to me straight away. So it's about teaching those principles about keeping depth, especially. If you want to make the lanes that way instead, it will help you keep more width. So it's a good way to teach spreading out, as well as penetration or when to support play. So penetration or when to support play, you're encouraging players. So when you win the ball, can you try and play into the next zone? So as soon as they win it, can they look forward and play from defence into midfield? Okay, so you're then teaching, right, when we win the ball, this is how we try and play. Okay, that might not necessarily be a pass into the next zone. It's if there's space in front of you, can you drive into the next zone with the ball? So you're just using these and then using these markers as a guide for players on where they should roughly be. And then your skill of the coach is talking about the decision making within it. On the flip side, you can work on the defending team. So actually, when you're attacking, you should have a player in every third of the pitch, because you keep your width and your depth, and then it allows you to recycle the ball if you need to, and you've got a better chance of keeping possession. When you haven't got the ball, though, you should be in the two zones next to each other. So whether that's the defensive zone and the midfield zone, or the midfield zone and the high zone, you've got to be in the two next to each other, because that creates compactness as a team. You can't have them in the top zone and the bottom zone, because then you've got this, they'll play through the middle. So two zones next to each other, compactness. So that's what you can teach the players. So in terms of the coaching points, I've talked about that in here. So it's talking to players about, can you have a player in each third? Is there space to drive into the next zone? Can you play forward into the next zone? And then also risk versus reward. So this is what I say, any age group, you can talk about this. Which zones should you take more risks in, and which zones do you want to take less in? Now, this might come down to you as a coach. You might want your players, defenders, dribbling out and taking one-on-ones. That's fine. But it's a way for players to start to think about risk and reward. And this is where you can put it onto the players to say, what do you think is the most risky areas to do certain things? And what would you do in each area? And they can come up with little principles about what they want to do. Okay, so next one. So this is the 1-0 game. And what you'll notice about all these pictures, they're pretty much just set up on football pitches. There's only one or two that are slightly different. So the 1-0 game for me is a bit of a psychological one. So you create a pitch with normal size, equal teams. Instead of having an overload, have odd players. So you might have 7 versus 6 or 5 versus 4 instead. So in this game, you can only ever be 1-0 up, and then you play for a time limit. So if you go, right, we're going to play for 5 minutes, but you can only ever go 1-0 up. So if the blue team score, they're 1 up. If they score again, they can still score again if they want to. So we're not taking decisions away, but they stay 1-0 up. If the red team then score, it goes back to 0-0. If the red team score again, they're then 1-0 up. So basically, whatever team is 1-0 up at the end of the time limit wins the game. This is all about decision making. And you can implement this as players get older. You can try it with young ones if you want. But it encourages them to think about, do they go all out to score, or do they just keep possession? So they can still score, they're allowed to. And then your job as the coach is to get some detail in it about what decisions they're making. They'll love it because they're still playing a game and they're still going full throttle. So the coaching points to look at is, can we play as normal and try to score? So even if you're 1-0 up, if you want to, score 2, score 3. When you're 1-0 up, should you relax and keep possession or try to score again? This may depend on what the opposition are doing. So if you're trying to keep possession and they're not really pressing you, then just keep possession, relax. If they're pressing you high, you know you're going to be in a bit of trouble if they get on top of you, especially in your half. You might then start playing some penetrating passes through and scoring more goals. But that's okay as well. So it's trying to figure out what you're doing and when. Also, from the flip side, if you're 1-0 down, can you be aggressive and press high to win it back? Might be a solution. Okay, or can you think of defensive tactics where you're going to isolate areas of the pitch where you're going to press the ball to win it back? So that's another game that can be used with all age groups, probably as you start to get a little bit older. Next one, I've shared one like this before. So it's counter-attack versus possession. This is really helpful if you've got 2 coaches or you've got an assistant coach and a head coach, because one takes each team and you can talk about the specific tactics for that team. And it means you're talking less and the players are playing more. So create a pitch with a realistic size again. Again, you would have you would have an overload rather than a magic player. Both teams play a game as normal. It's normal match rules. If you play offsides at your age group, use offsides. That's really important in this practice. If you don't use offsides, don't worry about it. It's really important because of the counter-attacking team might end up playing some more direct passes because the space is likely to be in behind. So one team must score within 8 seconds of winning the ball. You can adjust that time however you like. The other team have to have all their players in the opposition half before they can score. Okay, that will include normally the goalkeeper up to in and around the halfway line. You might put some cones down a third of the pitch to highlight where a third of the pitch, and so the goalkeeper has to be up to there, depending on where you have your goalkeeper and how high you have your goalkeeper coming out. Again, you play for a selected time period, and then you swap the rules for each team. So the counter-attacking team becomes the possession team and vice versa. So the coaching points on this, if you're the counter-attacking team, you're looking at, can you play forwards as soon as you win the ball to attack quickly? Play forwards doesn't always mean a pass. It might mean drive forwards. Do you want to high press so you can win it closer to the goal? So actually, if you win it close to the goal, it's easier to counter-attack and score. Or do you want to sit deep? Depending on what maybe characteristics your team have got, do you want to sit deep to win the ball and then counter-attack into space behind? The possession team will be thinking about, can they be patient in possession, their basic angles and distances and supporting runs, and then how can they break the opposition down? But they've also got to be thinking about, well, what happens if we lose the ball? Because we are pressing quite aggressively. So are they thinking about what's going to happen on transition behind them? So just a note on these can be 20 or 30 minutes of your session. If you've only got an hour session, don't try and go through all of these in one go. This can be 20, 30 minutes of your session. It can be a big bulk of it. The 10-second game. So this is a little bit like the 1-0 up game in terms of it's testing your psychological decisions, but this is really testing players under pressure. So how many goals do you see scored against your team just after you've scored a goal, and how frustrating is it? This will hopefully battle against that a little bit. So again, create the pitch normal size, have equal teams rather than have an overload rather than a floater. But both teams, it's just a normal match. The game is completely normal. But if the blue team score, they then get the centre again. They then have to keep the ball for 10 seconds for that goal that they've just scored to count. If the Reds win it back within 10 seconds, the goal they scored doesn't count. Okay, so what you tend to get happen in this practice is they score a goal, they go back, they're all excited, they'll play a pass back, and then the Reds will go like the Alamo at them, and then they'll panic and they'll lose the ball within 2 or 3 seconds. That normally happens the first couple of times you do this game. And then what they do is they start to get a little bit better at it, and they start to understand, right, what do I need to do? You want to make sure that the game involves a lot of goals. So even if you're playing 4v4, 5v5, you'll probably be using samba goals instead of smaller ones, just so you get lots of repetition of goals, because you need that to happen so that you can work on the bit of detail afterwards when they take the centre. And what happens normally after this, after they've scored 3 or 4 goals and they've lost the ball repeatedly straight away, they start to relax a bit. So as soon as they start playing from centre, they'll start to relax in possession, they'll keep the ball, and then they'll start to earn their points. If you then want to have more pressure as a coach to start to really stretch them, you start really shouting the numbers. So 10, 9, 8. And if you're getting louder, the closer you get to 1, they'll start to feel a bit more tense, and that's okay, because what you're trying to do is actually develop them psychologically. So have a go at that. It's a really good one, especially, like I said, this works with all age groups from under 6s, 7s up to adults. You might reduce the time period the younger they are. So if you're trying this with 7, 8-year-olds, you've got to keep the ball for 3 or 4 seconds just so they get a bit more success with it. And then the coaching points are basically to be composed on the ball. So you've got to be relaxed after you've scored and maintain possession. Then basically spread out, create angles and distances. And then it's about basic technical detail. So this is more about what's going on in your brain. If you keep the ball and the other team are pressing high, though, can you also look, is there an opportunity to go and score again? So if they go all really aggressive, press, can you go and score again? There's 2 ways you can do this. You can say, right, if you score twice, so if you score within 10 seconds, again, then you've got to keep the ball for both goals to count. Or you can say, if you score again within the 10 seconds, both goals count. You can adjust and adapt that however you want to do it. Maybe even ask the players what you think they want to do. Okay, so the using whip practice, this is one I shared online this week, but I will just go into a little bit more detail about it and give an explanation of it. So it's a normal pitch, but you do need to be 4v4 for this to work. Anything lower than 4v4 won't really work. 6v6, 7v7 will work, that's fine. Adjust the pitch dependent on the age group, and have 2 channels marked out with codes. I would suggest they're 5-yard channels roughly, because it gives enough distance. Now again, no one's locked into anywhere, and no one is not allowed in anywhere. Players can go wherever they want on the attacking and defending team. All you're encouraging is, when you've got the ball, can you get 2 players wide, 1 in each channel? Because that creates width. If you create width as a team, normally the opposition will go out there to try and counteract it, and will go out there to mark players or get close to players. One of the main purposes of getting width is not to actually play wide, it's actually to create more opportunities to play central, because you want to get the ball into your striker in and around the edge of the area if possible. Okay, so we actually create that width so we can play central. If the other teams stay very central and keep that compact, then go out wide. It's not a problem. We still do it, but the idea is, can we play central? Again, and that for that reason, I don't use you have to go wide before you can score. Because actually, if I can play straight into my striker who's 1v1, That's what I want my players to do. Okay, so instead of that, I say, right, if you score and the ball has gone wide for a channel, then it's worth 3 goals instead of 1. The pass doesn't even need to come directly from the channel, because what it might be is I play out, my players spread wide, I play out to a channel, that wide player recognises the players come out, defenders come out to press them, they set it back to me, and then I play through the gap the defender has left by going out wide. So although the direct pass hasn't come from the channel has been involved in the build-up play, allowing more space centrally for us. So that's why I do this practice and what I try and get from it. When you're in possession of the ball, create the width, like I said, and then make the decision, can I try and penetrate quickly, or do I need to use the wide areas? The quality of pass to the outside players is vital in this, because you've got to think, what foot does that player want it on? What speed do they want the pass at? Because if you recognise, well, actually, our best chance here is for that player to go down the line and get a cross in, your pass either needs to go in front of them or at a strong weight to their back foot so they can take their first touch forward. Okay, if the idea is actually they're under a little bit of pressure and I'm going to play it out wide so they can set it back to me so that I can play it through, you need to take a bit of weight off the pass so that the next person is able to do what they need to do with it. If that player is really talented and you can fizz it into them and they can still set it back, great. But if that's too much for them at that point, the weight of pass has got to allow them to play the next pass probably one touch. So that's where I talk about the quality of pass. Playing out from the back, nice and simple. So I would play this game over a half pitch normally. So this is where the pitch is slightly different. This is where it's not looking like a normal game. Okay, but for me, this is it's still a small-sided game. It still looks like the game, which is vital. But here, the blue team are trying to play out and scoring one of the 3 small goals. Okay, the red team are trying to win the ball back and scoring the big goal. So when I say they're playing through the little goals, you can either have them as goals that they shoot into, you can have them as gates that they drive through with the ball, or you can have a mixture of both. So if you've got 2 really attacking fullbacks that you want to get high, you would make the wide goals gates that they can drive through, or they can pass through. Okay, and the central one is normally for a penetrating pass into your striker. So you'd probably encourage him passing a lot more with the central goal. So with the other things you can do with this is one where I'm a bit hot on this one, because what you tend to find is no matter how old you are, whether you're 6 years old or 60-year-old, you want to attack the big goal and you work a bit harder when you go towards the big goal. So I tend to do it that the only way you get to attack against the big goal is if you're scoring the little goals 2 or 3 times, and then you swap ends. But you can do it like that, or you can do it with a time limit. So you're going to have 4 minutes attacking this way, then we're going to swap ends. That's up to you. I think you get more out of the players if you do it that you've got to score a certain amount of times in these goals before you get to attack the big goal. But that would depend on who you're coaching and the kind of how you set your environment. So this can be used again any age group, and you see how hard the team. So on this graphic, if the red team lost the ball to the blues, you would see how hard the reds work to defend the little goals because they still want to attack the big goal. So in terms of coaching points, when you've got the ball, again, it's what we just talked about, spread out to create enough width. You still need depth as well, but create the width and the depth to allow you to penetrate and play out from the back, because we're trying to play out from the goalkeeper. Little sayings to players of play to the best furthest forward option. So actually, if you can play straight into a centre midfielder because they've got loads of space or they've got the better of their opponent, play to them straight away. If your best furthest forward option is the centre back next to you, play it to them. But just think about what your best furthest forward option is. And then this is a skill as a coach, is let them play. And if they make decisions that you're not quite sure of, don't say to them why you're doing that or what you're doing. Ask them, what was your decision making there? Why did you play to that player? Because they sometimes see things we don't see and they have a justification behind it. If they're then seeing things that you think that's completely wrong, then coach them and work with them. So if there's no simple option on, you've got your width and depth, then the players need to move to create space. So then you can talk about rotation, little movements, double movements and stuff like that. Playing to the back foot of players so they can play forward. So if they're not under any pressure, can you play to their back foot so they can turn their body out and play forward? And then be patient in possession, but when you can penetrate, play forward. Okay, it's really vital that, because there's no point of keeping possession for possession's sake. Move the other team round, and when that opportunity to come forward happens, play forward. Okay, so that's 6 games I've gone through in detail there. But before I go on to the next bit, all of these I've pretty much talked about, except for this one, in possession. So they all have transition involved in them because they look like a game. You can now turn these 6 practices to 12 by flipping it and go, I'm not going to work on the attacking bit. I want to work on the defending part of it. So in the 1-0 game, the defending part of it is teaching when you haven't got the ball, we need to win it. So either we're high press or we create situations where we try and win the ball back. So that becomes a completely different session to being composed under pressure. The counter attack versus possession game. If you're defending against a counter attack, it's watching out for transition. It's actually, do we, as soon as we lose the ball, do we go and try and win it back straight away? So can we counter the counter attack? Okay. Or if you're the possession team, if you're defending against a possession team, can you be compact? Can you be hard to beat? Do you be aggressive and press in certain areas? So it comes a new session. The 10-second game obviously is about how to high press and win the ball really quickly when you haven't got the ball. And using width would be about maintaining compactness centrally, and then when the ball goes wide, how you deal with it and how you shift over as a group, or who deals with it 1v1. So that immediately makes same plans, same session plan, change the focus completely, and then you get a new session out of it. We probably spend roughly half our game defending, half our game attacking when we're playing at the weekends, but we probably don't spend 50% of our sessions working on defending compared to attacking. Some will say that's because players don't like defending. Just don't tell them you're doing defending. Say, right, we're doing this attack, we're doing this game about using width to attack, but then all your coaching points will actually just be around the defending bit, and most of them won't notice. Okay, so constraints and rules. I'm still roughly on the schedule, which is really good going for me because I was aiming to go for about 45 minutes. So I'm about there. So some people use the word constraints, some people will say rules. There's loads of different words for it, but it's just basically the situations and rules you're putting onto the game for the players. So here's some other ones I've mentioned. I think I've mentioned one of them already, but these are games that you can use just on a normal pitch. So set a normal pitch out, and some of these are slightly different to what I've said before. So before, where I've said, don't restrict their decision making, don't say you've got to play 2-touch or anything like that, because that does affect their decisions. Here, I do say that a couple of times, but then this is me changing the rules to get an outcome out of a session. So as long as you can justify it and you understand that I'm losing some realism by putting a rule in that affects players' decision making, that is okay. So passes equal goals doesn't do that. So however many passes you make is how many goals you get. So that's a great little game you can do. Adds a bit more risk versus reward, adds a little bit of pressure. I've shared this slide before, I've just adapted a little bit of it. So 1v1 dribbling. So whenever you win the ball, you must take a player on before you can pass or shoot. That's also if someone passes you the ball. If someone plays you the ball, you've got to beat someone before you can pass or shoot. This gets players to be a bit more positive when they're playing 1v1. I use this a lot more with younger age groups rather than older, because with younger age groups, I'm using this because I want to improve their confidence to take players on 1v1, and it's getting them to try different things 1v1 and improve their technical stuff. So that's why I use this with younger players. The advantage of it is if you take someone on at right back because you've been passed the ball and you lose the ball, that player that's got the ball off you then needs to beat someone before they can score. You might adapt it so that in the final third they don't need to if they've just won it because you want them to transition quickly. But in general, it creates players trying to take players on all the time. So with this, I would do this with smaller numbers, 2v2, 3v3, 4v4, and I would do it with younger age groups because they get lots of repetition at trying to take players on. Another one I've shared before is a high pressing. You split the pitch into thirds like we did before, but we concentrate on defending, and you give points, allocate points to a zone. So if you go, right, if you win the ball in a top zone and score, it's worth 3 goals. If you win it in the middle of the zone and score, it's worth 2, or the bottom zone and score, it's worth 1. That encourages high pressing. If you want to encourage a low block, they win 3 points for winning it in your defensive zone, 2 for midfield, 1 up high. If you're especially getting with adult players and older players, teenagers, and you go, right, we want to encourage our players to win the ball in midfield, so we're going to invite the opponents to play into midfield, then we're going to swarm them, make the middle one worth 3 points. So adjust your rules based on what outcome you're trying to get. 4 touch or 1 touch, loads of you know, is my favourite. You can either play 1 touch. If you can't play 1 touch, you have to have at least 4 touches. So basically what you're saying to players is either play quickly or be composed on the ball. Because if you can't play quickly, you're going to get put under pressure. But I don't mind that if you're comfortable enough on the ball that you keep it. The non-dominant foot game is you can only have 1 touch with your dominant foot each time the ball comes to you. So I'm right-footed. So if the ball comes to me, I can control it with my right foot if I want, but then my dribbles and my pass has got to be with my left foot. Or vice versa, I can take all my dribbles, I can control it and take my dribbles with my left foot and shoot with my right if I want. But each time you're in possession, only 1 touch is allowed to be with your dominant foot. And we use dominant and non-dominant rather than strong and weak. Just for a little psychological thing for players is, if you say that's your weak foot, it gives the impression that they can't improve it. Whereas actually you have your dominant and non-dominant. 1 touch finish, nice and simple. If someone in your team scores with first time finish, it's worth 3 goals. So that's not, it's got to be a first time finish, but you're rewarded for it. So again, this one doesn't take decision making away, it keeps it realistic. And then a nice counter attack one, if you score with 8 seconds of winning the ball back, it's worth 3 goals. So all of these ideas or rules or constraints, you can just do on a normal pitch, whether you're playing 4v4, 5v5, 6v6. It just adds rules to the game that brings a different outcome. You could also let players come up with rules if you need to. If you're working with the younger ones, give them a bit of ownership and let them come up with stuff. So another way to adapt your small-sided games is using scenarios. Now, I'm a big believer we need to let players decide on tactics, especially in training. And for those that haven't got players that communicate a lot, especially older players that don't communicate a lot, or players that aren't confident to talk or don't have a good game understanding, in your opinion, do this a lot more, but you have to let them come up with the tactics and the solutions. The joy of most of these is they're 5, 6, 7 minute games. So let them play the game once, come up with their tactics, try it out, then give them a break and say, right, that didn't work. We're going to play the scenario again, or that did work. How can you do it better? What are you going to change about your tactics? What are you going to, and then you facilitate the conversation. Do not tell them. If they played the game 2, 3, 4 times and they're failing, that's maybe when you step in and tell them, why don't you try this, this, and this? But let them have ownership over how they solve the scenario. Doesn't matter whether they're 6, 7 or 26, 27. Now, I do this and let kids that are 6, 7, 8 come up with tactics, because I know that then when they get to 16, they'll be comfortable and confident about talking to each other on the pitch. If you don't let them talk or have anything to say, when they get to 16, 17, they won't talk on the pitch. They'll talk in the change room, give it all the banter, they'll do all the text on the phone, but they won't communicate on the pitch. And I've done an in-situ with a coach the other night, and it was really interesting because they worked with a centre-back on when to drop off and when to press and stay tight with their player. And his justification was he was working with that centre-back because they're not very vocal, because they're not very confident. By the end of the session, the player was really vocal, really confident, telling players what to do around him, when to press, when to drop off. And the coach was delighted because he was like, oh, he seems so much more confident, he's talking. I'm really pleased that we've encouraged that. And I was like, well, actually, I had a different viewpoint on it. I was like, no one wants to say anything if it makes them look stupid. I don't care how old you are. Most people will not want to say something that they think is going to make them look stupid. So what the coach had done is actually painted pictures and said to this player, this is when you see that happening, that's when we need to press up. When you see this happening, we need to drop off. And you need these players to do these things. So he walked through each scenario on the pitch with that player. So my point of view was, I think he's talking because now he knows what he's saying and he knows what is going on. So it was nothing to do with his confidence about talking. It was his confidence of his game understanding. So if you make players more confident in their game understanding, they're more likely to be vocal. So these are scenarios that you can use and challenge your players with. And it's a really fun thing at training as well. So you're 1-0 up or 2-0 up with 5 minutes left. How are you going to play? What's your tactics? Let them come up with tactics, play the game for 5 minutes and see how it goes. Or you can use, it's 2v2 with 7 minutes to go, but you need to win the league. Go and play the game. Because if they go all out for it and then go 3-2 down, they've got to score twice. So they've got to learn from these scenarios and these situations you're setting up. You're 3-0 up, but you just had 2 players sent off. So you can do, if you're doing this with adults, you can just set it out as a tactical exercise, or teenagers, right? You're 3-0 up. How are we going to manage this game? How are we going to do it? If you're coaching kids, you can all be all dramatic about it and start crying, oh no, this has happened. 2 players, you've been sent off right now. You wouldn't actually send the players off to sit, you just adjust the teams. And then you let them make it all more fun and let them have a go at it. The ultimate scenario for me is, we call it Soccer Saturday on last day of the season. So if you've got 2 pitches running, especially, this works, 2 or 3 pitches. So say you've got 16 at training, you do 2 4v4s. You keep pretending to be on the radio on Soccer Saturday, and it's like one team are 2-0 up and the other team are 2-2. It's like, oh, it's just come through that so-and-so have scored at Old Trafford. This team that are 2-0 down, you need to get 1 goal back, and then you stay up. You'll stay up on goal difference. Or the other pitch, the team that are 2-2, the other team need to win. The red team need to win to qualify for the Champions League. And then what happens is, you can adapt to what's happening within the games. So if one team's 4-0 up and you go, right, well, actually, you've got to win 6-0 to win the league. If the other team only lose 5-0, you stay up. But there's only 2 minutes of the game left. And you can start to adapt around that and make it really good fun. And that works with young players of a lot of ages. And they have to then start adapting on the go. So again, I've just come up with 3 or 4 scenarios there. I focused all of them, pretty much my discussion on the in possession team. So I'm going against myself, where I was saying we've got to worry about defending as much. And I'm also a bit pragmatic as a coach. I like the defending part, to be honest. I prefer coaching defending to attacking. So why I base everything on attacking on these, I don't know. But these are going to be flicked to focus on the other team. So this one says you're 1 or 2-0 up with 5 minutes left. Okay, well, you're 2-0 down with 5 minutes left. So it's just changing things like that of how can you go at it. You can then let players set scenarios, or as your players get older, teenagers, adults especially, maybe even late primary school, relate it to scenarios you've been through. So, oh, we were 5-1 up at the weekend, and then we got a bit lazy and a bit slow, and then the other team scored. So you're 5-1 up, there's 10 minutes left, how are we going to manage this game? And you can teach them tactics around it. So scenarios, that's how to use them. Last slide, gone over my time now, haven't I? Tried 45 minutes, 5 more minutes and I'll be done. Last slide, something I get asked a lot about is how to challenge the individuals within your group, and to challenge the group as a whole. So I've listed some general issues you might get with players, and then some challenges you might be able to use within a small-sided game. So the key is you're using these challenges within a game. So it might be 7v7 or 4v4 going on, and you walk around to individuals and you give them their own little challenge. The reason it's important you do this within a small-sided game is because it needs to be in a realistic scenario, and there needs to be realistic pictures around them so they can make better decisions about what they're doing. So in these challenges, I've gone from kind of one extreme to the other. So I prefer to say to players, I don't like to say to players, you must play 2-touch. I prefer to say to a player, can you play 2-touch as much as you can at the right times? So I'm trusting them to do it. And then I, as a coach, will discuss their decisions that they've made with them. So I like to coach like that. Some people just say, I'm just going to put them on 2-touch for a couple of minutes, just so they start to move the ball quicker. But I tend to use the other way. But I've put a variety of ways to do it in each one. So adjust it to you as a coach, or adjust it to the individuals that you're working with as well, because you know them better than I do. So if a player takes too many touches, you can say the rule of you can play 1 touch or have at least 4. That could be their little condition. You can put them on a maximum of 3 touches. Or something I've done is I'm going to film you for 1 minute. So we used to have iPads. So film you for 1 minute and see how many times you scan before you receive the ball. Because actually the reason they're not moving the ball quickly might be because they're not aware. Then you let the player watch the video and you say, count how many times you scan. And it'll be minimal, a few times. You might not even tell them you're doing it the first time, to be honest. And then you say, right, go and do it again. I'm going to film you again, see how many times you scan. I guarantee it will double straight away. They'll start looking constantly. Yes, they will then revert back to type a little bit, but if you can do stuff like this all the time, it will help them. Obviously, safeguarding rules around filming, etc., needs to be sorted out. You get a player that just lashes at a shot every time the ball comes to him, just smashes it. If you can, so you can might put in, right, if you can finish with the side of your foot, it's worth double. So that stops them smashing it and starts them thinking about, all right, I might place, I'm going to try and place it instead. You could add cones near to the corners of the goals. Say if you score between the corner and the cone and the post, it's worth 3 goals. You might say to them, you can't shoot first time if it's outside the penalty area. Because actually they might be good at shooting from distance, but it's just they're being a bit wild a bit sometimes. So if you say if it's outside the penalty area, you have to take, you can't shoot first time, they'll normally take a touch and then finish. So it'll affect their decision making a little bit, but you might get a better technical return out of it. These challenges you can either give to the whole group or you can start giving to individuals within the group. If you've got players that are lazy to defend, you could put in something like when your team loses the ball, for every player, if the other team score, for every player you've still got in the opposition's half, they get an extra goal. So if my striker starts being lazy and they counter attack and score, they get 2 goals because we've got another player that stayed up there. So that means they'll just start working back on transition a little quicker. You can then say if you win the ball back within 4 seconds of losing it, your team gets a goal. So that might be where you start challenging the individual. So you've got the lazy player that doesn't track back. They lose it. If they can win it within 4 seconds, they get a goal for it. Or the way I prefer to do it is, can you try to win the ball back as soon as you lose it? And then you can reinforce that with players as you go along. Player takes too many touches and doesn't move the ball quick enough might be seen as similar. But for me, the player that takes too many touches might be someone that's just not aware or likes to just, it's not a good decision they're making. They're just getting their head down and just being like that. The player that doesn't move the ball quick enough is the player that takes 3 or 4 touches to pass the ball when they only need 2. So they've got the awareness, but sometimes it's not the technical ability to take the first touch out their feet so the second one can move it. So this is where I said, can you try to play 2 touch? If you're going really harsh and strict is you must play 2 touch maximum. Or if you want to be a bit more creative with it, if you can play an assist within 2 touches and your team scores, it's worth 3 goals. Because what you're encouraging them is, can they receive? So they're looking forward. Can their first touch set their second touch up to be a through ball or a cross? So you'll start creating good little number 10s then that can maybe be a bit more creative and try and create opportunities. And you get players that maybe panic on the ball. So that's where you say you must take at least 2 touches on the ball. So it just stops them hitting it first time. Something we do with younger kids all the time with 3 and 4-year-olds. If you just smash the ball when it comes to you, the other team get a free kick. So we're just encouraging, put your foot on top of it first. Doesn't matter if you lose it. And again, that's the harsher end of the scale. The lower end of the scale is, can you try and control the ball and look up before you make a decision? So there's a loads of little challenges there that you can use with individuals within your group. You can give the challenges to the whole group if you like to. Aware I've run over a little bit of time, but any questions you can chuck in the chat and I will stay on and answer them. Or you can message me on the Facebook page, Instagram page, or on YouTube. This will be shared on the Facebook page and we'll put onto YouTube and stuff like that. And I'm going to clip a few bits up. I'm probably going to put all the sessions into like a mini book and I'll send that out. So if you're signed up to our newsletter, I'll send that out to everyone on the newsletter as well. That's probably going to take me a couple of weeks to put it together, but I'll send that out from this webinar and the webinars we've done before. And like I said, we're going to follow this up with we've got a free newsletter that goes out. We're now going to start designing one which does your session design for you each week to give you loads of ideas, which is probably going to come in the next few months. But you can follow us everywhere. And obviously, hopefully, if you enjoy what we're putting out, please share it as much as you can, because the more engagement we get, the better. If you can share it in your grassroots clubs or on your socials, that would be greatly appreciated. But any questions, chuck them. Otherwise, I will be shooting off to hope that my kids have gone to sleep.
Thanks, Seb.
No problem. Thank you very much. Scott, great. So I've got a question. I tend to find setting challenges sets off a domino effect of people questioning why is he the only one doing that. Right, it's a really good question. So it's either, yeah, you can create loads of them. One simple way around it is maybe do one player per team. So, and then you can change that player yourself on. So if you go, right, each team's going to have a, I try and build it up and big it up. So everyone's going to have a bonus point player or something like that. So you say, right, on the blue team, if Harry can finish one touch, that's worth 3 points for your team. On the other team, if Sarah can play 2 touches and create an assist with it, that's going to be worth 3 points. What the other team will do then is they'll focus play around that player to give them more opportunity to do what they're doing. Then what you do is obviously after 5 minutes, you've then got to swap it. So there's different bonus players. So you will still need to have a lot of challenges for each player set out, but you haven't got to give them all at once and then overwhelm yourself. So that's something I've done in the past. Sometimes you can set the whole team a challenge all the way around. So they're all on the same challenge. And this is where the try works quite well. So instead of saying to everyone, so you just pull one player to the side and say, can you try and play 2 touch in there when you can? And then I'm going to see how you get on for a few minutes and then come over and have a chat with me. Because that doesn't necessarily seem like a challenge. It's you just giving a little bit of coaching. So hopefully try over those and see how they get on. I hope you're well as well, Scott. I haven't seen you for a while, mate, but I hope all is good.
Cheers, Seb. Yeah, great advice, mate. Thank you very much.
No worries. Right. Great stuff, everyone. Thank you very much. And I shall see you all soon.
Cheers, Seb.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye, mate.